Welcome to the Emotional Mastery Podcast. I am your host, Rochelle. I'm a holistic human design health coach, and this is a space for your human design and spiritual journey. It's not about being a master of your emotions, rather mastering the tools to self-regulate, to awakening yourself and remembering who you are. Human design changed my life about 5 years ago, and I've been learning and teaching the system ever since. This podcast is human design meets spirituality meets astrology. You don't have to have a belief system to be here, just an open mind and curiosity. This is a journey of meeting yourself and awakening to your infinite potential. Now, let the magic begin. Welcome back to another episode of the Emotional Mastery Podcast. I was sitting here over the last couple days thinking about what I wanted to talk about this week. And partly I wanted to talk about mindset because I think that's been coming up hugely recently, but it's always this tie between our mindset and our emotions. And, whether we're looking to manifest abundance and money or a relationship, we find ourselves in these looping subconscious beliefs. I was literally having a conversation yesterday with somebody about Jennifer Lopez. I guess she's getting divorced from Ben Affleck. And I was like, there's got to be some limiting belief or some looping thought or something when she gets to a point in relationships where, I don't know, it doesn't work or whatever the case is. But we all have these limiting beliefs that are created from that 0 to 7 age, right? Where we're highly conditioned to believe the stories of other people, or we get a certain response from somebody and we take that to mean something about us. And so I sort of want to dive into our moon sign because I think when we're looking at astrology or human design, especially with the solar plexus, and I'll touch on that a little bit, I think it is so powerful to understand what your emotional needs are. And, we're not taught astrology when we were born, or our parents weren't, or I guess now if you're listening to this and you're about to have kids or you have kids, you're probably in that world, right? And I think that understanding that is so helpful for even my children, right? My daughter has an Aries moon, my son has a Gemini moon. So being able to answer those questions and being able to, empower my daughter that, yeah, you might be prone to frustration or anger or whatever, but you want to take action and do things, and being there to support that and hold space for that is so powerful. Because our emotions are powerful, right? And they shape our thoughts, they influence our decisions, and they really just impact our overall well-being. So again, those emotional patterns that we experience are deeply rooted in our subconscious mind, and we can really understand that by looking at our moon sign, the element, the sign, all that stuff. I personally, when I look at mine, I have a Leo moon. It's so dramatic, right? But the Leo moon really needs to be, I'm not going to say validated, appreciated, seen, and not in I think, of course, there's a shadow and a higher expression of everything. So, of course, in that shadow side, it could be needing to be validated or needing to be the center of attention or things like that. But in its higher expression, it just wants to be appreciated. Leo is very generous and it's very warm. And so and it has big emotions, right? Leo, everything it does is big. It's the sun, it's the lion, right? It's going to be grand and big in the way that it does things, and it's not necessarily to attract attention. I think naturally any Leo energy just naturally calls that attention in, right? The sun is the biggest thing in the sky. It's everything, every planet, it's centered around the sun. And so whether or not the intention is to attract attention, I think that it will naturally draw that in. And so of course, every single moon sign has a different shadow and higher expression of it. But, again, the moon sign, it's one of the most significant placements in your chart. It represents your emotions, your instincts, your subconscious mind. And so, your sun speaks to your ego and your conscious identity, right? Your moon shows how you feel on the inside, how you react emotionally, what you need to feel secure, and your most ingrained habits, right? From childhood, these things that just it's subconscious, right? It's on instinct. It's how we respond through life. So if you think of your moon as the lens that you experience your emotions, just like your rising is the lens that you experience the world, the sun is the lens that you experience, your ego and yourself. And so every single aspect of our chart it's a nuanced element or aspect of how we view the world, the lens that we're viewing the world from in totality, right? And so the moon, again, it's the lens that we experience our emotions. So it's how we respond to life, how we nurture other, how we want to be nurtured, how we gain comfort, how we feel secure. right? And it's this little hidden part of ourselves that indicate our reactions, right? Even before we're consciously aware of what's happening. And so understanding our moon sign can be really, really helpful. And of course, like going back to childhood. So when we're looking to manifest something, right? It's all this work on these subconscious beliefs, and all these subconscious beliefs were instilled in early childhood between the age of like 0 to 7 years old. So our emotional patterns, right? Whatever, if those emotional needs were not met. I was reading a book, oh my gosh, I think it was called Rewire. And it was about, rewiring our subconscious beliefs, rewiring our neural pathways so that we can manifest and just be happy, whether you're talking about money or just joy, right? I think we have so many looping thoughts and patterns, but that 0 to 7 year age is where we took on all these things to mean something about us, right? And so when we're looking at emotional patterns, like there was one example in that book, the reason I brought it up was that the author was given an example of this woman who was raised in a seemingly happy household. Parents were together, like, I don't know how old she was at the point of writing this book, but her parents were still together. This and the other thing, they like loved each other. They barely ever fought. It was a healthy house. And yet she had a sister, and the sister was like the smart one, right? And she just had she was good at dancing. So the parents were like, well, you're not smart. I mean, they didn't say that, but in a nutshell, right? It's like, you're not smart. Well, why don't you be a dancer? Like, you're really great at dancing. And so they put this label or this archetype or whatever it is on her that was all that she could do. And so she wasn't happy doing that. And so, it's that idea of like big T, little t trauma, right? It's all subjective. It's all how we experience it. And I think that our moon sign and our emotions are hugely impactful for the way that we experience trauma, right? A lot of times we have emotional trauma from childhood, and it's hard to be like, oh, well, I'm traumatized or I have trauma because of this, when like, I know I experienced that for a long time. When I first went to therapy and like started digging into it, I was like, I don't get it. Cause like, I'm 38 now. My parents have been together for nearly 40 years. Same thing, like the happy, like they barely fight, this and the other thing. I could not understand like why I was attracting relationships that were toxic and abusive. I could not understand why I had no self-worth. I couldn't understand all these things because my family was happy, right? Like from the outside, everything was happy. And like I said, they really didn't fight that much. And we got to travel and, fortunate enough that, my parents had money and could provide and things like that. And so it was like, why we tend to diminish, I guess, or lessen or invalidate our experiences because of when we compare, right? And there really is no comparison. But when we look to our moon and our emotions, it's like, I can look back and say, I have a Leo moon. It is big. It is dramatic. And there is a part of that needed appreciation. It needed to be seen. And so I feel like when I look back at my experiences, I think that part of my trauma came from not feeling seen, not feeling, I'm going to say validated. And more so like that, just being seen and appreciated, I guess. But I felt like those things, I wasn't really nurtured in the way that my moon needed to be nurtured. I also have my moon square Pluto. So it's going to be intense no matter what way you look at it. And those are parts of astrology too that can be really helpful in understanding, right? So again, if we look at like our moon sign and understand our emotional patterns, again, it's really connected to our early childhood conditioning. So literally from the moment you were born, we started to learn how to respond to the world around us. And those responses tended to be through our moon sign, right? So the environment we grew up in, the way that we were nurtured, the emotional climate of our family, it all played a role in how our moon expressed itself, right? Or didn't express itself. So it created like a blueprint for our emotional responses on an unconscious level, because that 0 to 7 years are all unconscious programming that we've taken on, right? So as an example, if your parents or caregivers were nurturing and consistent, then your moon might be able to express itself in a more balanced and secure way, rather than if your early environment was maybe chaotic and unpredictable. Your moon sign might show up in a more challenging way, like insecurity, volatility, reactionary, all those things, right? And so like understanding and looking back at those patterns. So as we grew up, our emotional patterns became ingrained habits, right? So repetition and emotion. So of course, this is all based on our emotions, right? So our emotions and the repetition of these things is what creates a habit. It's what creates a subconscious belief. It's what creates how we're just running on autopilot sometimes, right? It really Your moon governs how you instinctively react to emotional triggers. So, for example, again, if you have a Cancer moon, you're going to want security and comfort in familiar surroundings when you're stressed out. Versus if you have an Aries moon, you may react impulsively or assertively in emotional situations. And these emotional habits are like automatic, and they often happen without like your conscious thought because they are subconscious, right? Patterns from childhood. But how they were nourished or not, or nurtured or not, can be helpful or unhealthy, right? They're not always going to be, I don't want to use the word correct, but again, there's higher expressions and lower expressions. So it can, again, lead to repetitive cycles of behavior that keeps us stuck in limiting beliefs or unfulfilling situations. And if you're resonating with this or, whatever, then I think that a lot of times these do kind of show up later in life when we're having to deal with these things, right? As just being unhealthy, or feeling limited, stuck, unfulfilled, all those things, right? So the shadow side, again, like I said, every sign has a higher expression and a lower expression, right? So every moon has a shadow side. Those things that are a little bit less than desirable, right? That really can trip us up and make us feel stuck if we're not aware of them. So again, like a Leo moon, my Leo moon, can struggle with pride or the need to feel consistent or constant validation from others. Whereas versus a Virgo moon can get caught in worry, perfectionism, right? And so these shadows can be emotional blocks and then reinforce those limiting beliefs that we already had based on our childhood. So understanding the shadow side of your moon is really, really helpful. And I think understanding the shadow of everything, like human design, I really use it to understand our shadows, because once we can see our shadows, we begin to put light on it. And then that's when we can really begin to heal, right? And so we can begin creating these unconscious or bringing these unconscious like patterns and limiting beliefs to the surface. And then we can start working on them. Like I've really realized lately how much when I feel a trigger, like in relationships, it's like I want to then seek this like immediate hit of like validation from elsewhere, right? Where it's like, well, you're not giving it to me, I'm going to find it elsewhere. It's not healthy, right? It's not the way that it's not a higher expression of that Leo, right? Leo rules the heart, right? And so I think that, when we're looking from that lens, it's like if I can just, love myself and love others and be generous and kind and warm and compassionate and all those things that are such beautiful traits of Leo, then I would be able to fill the higher expression. But I was, I took on to mean or whatever it is when in childhood became reactionary. It was like, okay, well, if you're not going to give me this, I'm going to go find it elsewhere. And that's like sort of my shadow side. And so it really takes that intention of understanding that shadow to come back and be like, okay, Rochelle, we don't have to do this, right? Like we can stay where we're at and we can work through it. We can have the conversation, like whatever it is. And I think a big one for me is feeling seen. I felt that my opinion didn't matter a lot, and that carried through from childhood to my adult relationships. And so being able to begin to rewire that, right? So once we can see what our limiting beliefs are, and you can do a Google search online, just like the shadows of Virgo moon, Aries moon, Gemini moon. There's so much information out there right now, but once you can identify what those shadows will be, then you can really see when they present themselves in your life, right? So understanding what those limiting beliefs, those subconscious thoughts are that tell us that we're not good enough, we're not worthy, we're incapable, we can't have what we desire, right? Those beliefs are usually tied to your moon sign and the emotional patterns that you develop over time. So again, another example, Capricorn moon, right? Capricorn moon can feel like emotions are weakness. They can lead to suppressing your feelings and a fear of vulnerability. And as somebody who's dated so many Capricorn moons, like literally being vulnerable, like I can see how uncomfortable that makes them, because it literally feels like a weakness. Like, oh my gosh, I can't express that. I can't be like that because I'm less than. Especially I feel like in men, the masculine feels weak when they express those emotions. And it's not true. That's a limiting belief, right? So again, in order to rewire them, we have to identify them. So you can ask yourself, like, if you journal, I highly recommend journaling to everybody, right? But it's like, what emotions do I experience most often? What am I making those mean about me? What stories am I making up about those emotions? Is that story empowering, or do they reinforce a lack or limitation, right? And so again, emotional awareness is so, so huge. And it's really the first step in transforming and rewiring those emotional patterns. Emotional awareness really involves like paying attention to what you're feeling without judgment, like letting go of the judgment. Because I think a lot of times we'll find the judgment and then be like, oh my gosh, don't feel this, don't do that. Or just like noticing those looping stories and thoughts that come in our head, right? Are you waking up and telling yourself you can't do something? Or, what's the first thing that comes in? I was having sort of like, I don't even know if I would call it a hard conversation at work, but a conversation that was a little bit critical. And I noticed in the moment, my thoughts were like, I need to get a new job. Like, this isn't working. I was getting angry because I feel like I had this subconscious belief of like, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. And so it really took that moment of like coming back and having compassion and be like, that's interesting that my thoughts immediately went to that place. And then having to rewire it and be like, no, I am worthy. I am great. Like, these are just constructive criticism areas that I can do better in. It does not mean that the person is saying you're not good, right? It's how can I further develop myself as a leader? And so that was a huge thing that came up for me. And I think that's what, having emotional awareness really is. It's like rewiring those thoughts and being able to bring awareness to your reactions, your emotional reactions, right? Because of course, like Leo, it's again, the sun, and it's big and it's bold. And for somebody to come in and make it feel less than, right? Like that's that shadow of feeling like not being validated or not being worthy, really comes down to that. So then again, once we identify it and we go through it, we can understand the shadows. We see when it's come up. We notice those looping thoughts, right? Like rewiring those is where like the magic is. And, if you listen to TBM, or there's so many books on literally this concept of like neuroplasticity, and it's really just the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. So this means that with repetition and motion, right, with practice, we can literally rewire our brains to respond differently to an emotional trigger. And so, this is journaling is really helpful. Finding yourself in a meditation, visualization, all these techniques and tools that we talk about are really helpful to rewire our brains. And so again, coming back to the moon, because this is what we're talking about today, understanding the moon sign really gives you a roadmap for where to start with that. So recognizing your shadows, your emotional responses, you can then begin to consciously choose new and healthier responses, right? And so then over time, these responses become the new norm, reprogramming your emotional patterns, reprogramming your mind, your thoughts. It's all tied together. And I could go down a whole rabbit hole of our physical body, because I think it all makes a difference. What we're eating, if we're moving our body, consuming enough water, like all these also help to support us in this rewiring our neural pathways. But it is like consistent work and consistent effort. I just gave that example of the conversation at work. My go-to was this negative belief, and I was able to just catch it a little bit sooner than I would have maybe 2-3 years ago, right? Where maybe before I would have thrown my hands up and be like, I'm out, like I got to get a new job. And I've done that in the past, when I have gotten constructive criticism, but it's like understanding that the belief that I have doesn't mean it's a story I've created, right? And so like anything, if you want to find something that will reinforce a story, whether I'm air quoting it, good or bad, like you will, right? If you want to find proof that you're not worthy, you will. If you want to find proof that you are worthy, you will. So it's like, why not find the proof of the things that are more positive and uplifting and will help you rewire your brain and help you with your emotional responses versus, right, finding things that will support the negative belief. So again, like then once we see our negative beliefs, our reactions, then with this neural rewiring our neural pathways, then we can create new and empowering emotional responses. So consciously, actively choosing how you want to feel and how you want to respond. So taking a moment to pause, right? Take a deep breath, go to the bathroom, like whatever, right? Ask for help when you want to isolate. I've noticed that so much this summer. I so many times want to just push people away and sort of like play the victim and be on my own island, like crying. And it's just not helpful, right? So being able to ask like, hey, can I talk to you? Do you have space for me to share with you? Like, and also at the same time, not repetitively complaining to everybody, right? It's like finding support or whatever it is that you like, just notice your go-to responses and actively try and work through that. So positive affirmations and visualizations can be really helpful. I always journal affirmations in the morning. And, affirmations are a tricky one because we can write affirmations all day, but if we don't believe them, it's kind of useless. And also, I do believe that if we write affirmations every day, there will become a point where we do believe it, right? Repetition and emotion. So We might not have the emotion backed behind it, but once we're writing it every single day, like I write the same emotions, I write the same affirmations every day. And so now when I get into these negative thought patterns or loops, I can pull into that and be like, I am worthy. I got this. Like I am so capable. I am so enough. Like I'm intelligent. I'm beautiful. Like whatever those things are, I can pull those out and sort of repeat those to myself in the moment. Right. And so okay, so we've identified our moon. We've identified the shadow. We're noticing our limiting beliefs. We're noticing our patterns. We're noticing our habits, and now we're working to rewire them. And I'm going to pull in human design a little bit here because I do think our emotional solar plexus is hugely impactful as well. I have talked about it so many on here. I've talked about it in episodes here before where I know people who have, I always use the example of Capricorn moons. I apologize. I truly do love you guys. It's just the most challenging moon sign for my Leo moon to deal with. So I always kind of go back to that. But I know a lot of people, who are Capricorn moon with completely open solar plexus, completely disconnected from emotion. I mean, their idea of vulnerability to me is not vulnerable at all, right? Because I'm Leo. I'm like, I want to shed my skin. And I have a moon square Pluto, right? So it's intense. I want to like rip open my chest and like give you everything. So that to me is vulnerability, where it's like we're so deeply in it. And a Capricorn moon with a completely open solar plexus, a vulnerability share might be like, oh, I cried the other day over something. And like, that's it. And I'm like, wait, what? Let's go back to that. Let's talk more. Let's dig in. Like, why? What did that bring up, right? And so that idea of vulnerability is very different for different people. And then you have, then maybe you have a Capricorn moon. I have another good friend. Greg has been on this podcast before. We've had conversations about it. He has a Capricorn moon and a defined solar plexus. So his ability to hold space for the emotional process is different because he understands the emotional wave. He is riding a wave even though he has a Capricorn moon. So vulnerability could still be difficult, but he also understands what an emotional wave is versus the Capricorn moon with a completely open solar plexus has no frame of reference for what the emotional process feels like. When they feel it so intensely by taking it and amplifying from others, then it becomes really challenging for them to even know what's happening, right? Because they're just not used to that vulnerability. So there's so many different nuances. And I think that having, emotional authority really makes a difference as well. Because when we look back at childhood, again, you could have that same Capricorn moon with a completely open solar plexus and the Capricorn moon with emotional authority. And you have to they're very different ways to process through it. So whatever your authority is, there's very different ways that we have to go through it, right? So Leo moon, emotional authority. So I had to wait, and I was so impulsive. I never waited, right? I had emotional authority and a defined root center. So I was just like, oh my gosh, I need to do it now, right? Whereas if I had been taught how to ride my wave, maybe my processes and my reactions would have been a little bit different. But this is really just, your authority in human design is how you make decisions. And so combining like that with your moon sign, it can really help you create emotional mastery, right? Like understanding that. So yeah, that can be really helpful. And then just like, how do we tangibly pull this into our day, right? Rewiring emotional patterns takes consistency and patience, but the rewards are huge, right? So if we start with a daily practice like journaling, I always recommend journaling. It's so helpful, like literally hand to paper. But also if you don't want to do that, your phone, whatever is fine. There's just it activates a different part of your brain when you actually physically write it, and it like activates long-term memory versus short-term, and it's the whole thing. Meditation is really helpful. Just sitting there, mindfulness exercises, and meditation in the sense of like just noticing your thoughts. I think a lot of us think like, okay, my room is distracting me. My Roomba has been, my son, it like, every single time it turns on, it gets caught in this my bedside table. It gets caught underneath it. So finally, I have to go in there every single day and pull it out. So finally, I was like, you know what? It's just going to stay there. And so it's literally been under there, like just not on for months. And my son just found it and he pulled it out and charged it. And so it just started and it's distracting me now. So if you can hear it, apologies. It's probably bothering me more than it is anybody else. But where were we at? Okay. So rewiring those, like journaling, meditation. Oh yeah. So I'm actually reading A Court of Thorns and Roses. I've been obsessed with this book this summer, or the series. But there's a part, I mean, the last book of it, but one of the girls, one of the women in the book is learning to meditate and breathe and all these things. And it's explained in the book, which is so powerful, the form of meditation. It's like, it's really just witnessing your thoughts, right? So that we can understand like how we're speaking to ourselves. So even all this, you know, the moon sign and everything that's coming up, like when we can identify those patterns and what thoughts they're creating and how we're reacting and things like that is really helpful in meditation, right? And it's all about self-discovery. It's all about knowing yourself. I'm actually reading a book. It's called The Abundance Book, and it's talking about knowing yourself as far as abundance and creating abundance, right? And so there's just like a little quote in here. I think it's let me see if I can find it real quick. Oh, it's Jesus, right? Jesus says, but if you will not know yourself, then you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty. And so it's just this idea of like, the more we know ourselves, the more we can be authentic, the more we're naturally going to draw in abundance, right? And, you know, sometimes even when it comes to like my moon sign, my moon is square Pluto. So I've had to accept that there are times where I'm just going to be intense. It is going to be challenging, right? I don't have to like be it, but it's always going to cycle through that because Pluto is death, transformation, rebirth, power, control, intensity, all of these things on top of a Leo moon in my 12th house, right? Like it is going to be intense. And there are some days where I don't know. Like I was having an emotional day the other day and somebody was like, what's wrong? I was like, I don't know. I just feel like this. And I have an emotional authority, right? So it's like sometimes just accepting those things. But again, it's being authentic to who we are is how we're then going to vibrate differently. Our frequency is going to shift and we're going to be able to attract more, whether it is abundance or relationships or just like authenticity, right? More joy and just like being who we are. And so, okay, so if we want to have, I'm going to give you like a little journaling tool, guided journaling based on your moon sign. So you can literally just start this like right now or come back to this podcast, save it. And of course, you know, let me know how this worked out for you. So first thing you want to do is, what is your moon sign, right? You can do astro.com, really any online like astrology calculator, just Google astrology chart if you don't have yours, if you don't know yours, right? And then you'll be able to see what your moon sign is. So even further, if you're completely coming from the basics, find what your moon sign is, Google it, right? See what the shadow or higher expression of it is. If you are a little bit more advanced, identify the aspects because, you know, like I said, I have Leo moon square Pluto. That like drastically changes the makeup of my moon, right? But even just at its base, understand what the shadow sides are. So then you can use a journaling prompt to identify your moon sign. So really identifying those limiting beliefs, if we spent some time to really see it, like notice what's coming up when you're in a trigger. So just start there, right? Like an Aries moon. This is just, I'm going to give a couple examples. But when I feel anger rising, what am I truly trying to protect or defend, right? How can I assert myself in a way that honors my needs without conflict? If you have a Taurus moon, Taurus is all about security and senses and being grounded, right? So what makes me feel secure and grounded? How can I cultivate this feeling in my life without relying on external possessions, right? Because it's very possessive as well. Another example, Gemini moon, when I'm overwhelmed by thoughts, because Gemini is ruled by Mercury. Gemini is the mind, right? It is communication. It's the mind. It's curious. It's playful. It's all those things, right? How can I create a sense of calm? It's an air sign. What truths am I avoiding with constant mental chatter? So you can even look at fiery signs. All fiery signs are going to just like that. There's fire, there's a little bit of anger, there's some friction. Like think of all things fire. Any moon. So fire signs are going to be Aries, Leo, Sagittarius. Earth, right? Earth is very grounded. Earth values security, safety. It needs a sense of like groundedness and stability, right? So that's going to be Taurus. That's going to be Virgo, and that's going to be Capricorn. Air signs are very, I don't want to use the word flaky, flighty. It's air, right? It's can be very mentally all over the place, right? It's going to be Gemini, that's going to be Libra, and that's going to be Aquarius. And then we have our water signs, very emotional, right? Very sensitive, psychic, all of these things. And that's going to be Cancer, that's going to be Scorpio, and that's going to be Pisces, right? So just identifying like how these present themselves, right? So then identifying and limiting beliefs. So just pay attention to what's coming up when you're emotionally activated. So write them down, right? If you can. I like to do a reflection at night, not all the time, but I tend to when I'm feeling really activated. It really helps me just sort of like brain dump and get everything out. So if you do like a little reflection at night, like write down what you noticed when you were emotionally activated, right? And so then once we have this, we've created a little bit of awareness, then we can reframe and rewire, right? For each limiting belief that you've found, create a positive affirmation to replace it, right? So if again, let's go with that Leo moon. So I need external validation to feel worthy. If this is your limiting belief, we're going to flip it and reframe it. My worth is inherent and I validate myself, right? So the opposite of whatever that limiting belief is. Another one for me is like, I'm incapable. This is literally my core wound. This is my core limiting belief. And so it's a lot of me being like, I am capable. I am worthy. I got this, right? Like I got this shit. I can do it. Based on that core wound of I am incapable. You can try visualizations. I don't know why I'm not the best at these, but I know that they are really, really powerful, right? Visualize yourself responding to emotional triggers in a like new positive way. How do you want to show up? How do you want to embody that energy? Do you want to take a pause? Do you want to have a constructive conversation, right? Like whatever it is, just continue to visualize that. And then you'll be able to really embody that the more that it comes up. And then if you are journaling, of course, this is going to track your progress naturally. That way you can see how these things present themselves. You can see how you're changing. Like sometimes I'll respond to something so differently and I'm like, whoa, I have come so far, right? Because I think sometimes when we're on like the journey of healing, we can feel like we're not making any progress. And so just these little like micro wins are really, really helpful to like propel us forward and to make us feel like we are getting somewhere, right? So if you're tracking it, if you're journaling, it's just really, really, really helpful. So that's all that I have for today. I hope that this was helpful and helped you understand your moon sign a little bit better and those, subconscious emotional patterns. The power to transform your emotional landscape is inside of you. And it's really that consistency, that repetition and emotion that can really, really help to rewire your mind and just help you into your higher self. And I think today we went into Virgo season. And Virgo is beautiful in just the way that Virgo sort of bridges the I and then the we of astrology, right? It's like the two halves. And Virgo is a little bit of a perfectionist. It's a little judgmental. It's in service to others. And the reason that Virgo is a little bit of a perfectionist, it also rules the 6th house, which is health and daily routines. And Virgo is like perfecting the self so that we can show up in relationships as the highest expression of ourselves. And I think that's beautiful. I think that when I understood Virgo to be like that, it's like that's why Virgo tends to be a little bit more judgmental and critical, more so of itself than anybody else. But because it is trying to be the most perfect version of itself. And of course, there's shadow and higher expressions of everything. And I think that Virgo can get caught up in the shadow of it. But it really is this beautiful energy of, correcting itself and also knowing that there's nothing wrong with you. But I think a lot of that work is going to be coming up, in Virgo season, maybe a change of routine or what we need to implement, getting organized, analytical, structured, all those things, to find that safety and security within ourselves, because it is an earth sign. But yeah, I hope you liked this episode. If it was, if you found value in it, share it with a friend. Let me know what you thought about it. Find me on Instagram at rochelle.christiane, ROCHELLE.CHRISTIANE. Empower, a 9-week program to help you deeply understand your chart and yourself, will be beginning September 1st. So I think that's like 10 days from now. The link is down below. It's $222 for the 9-week program. There are weekly calls, lifetime access, WhatsApp group, all of the beautiful things to really help you deep dive into it. We're also going to be understanding our gates as it relates to, human design, your gates in each planet, to like give you that deeper lens of how you are showing up in the world. We're going to understand aspects, and as we go through moon cycles, we'll be having moon circles, and I really am excited about this program. I've really been just resting, recharging, relaxing, all of the things this summer, and so I feel really excited to like jump back into it. And I think this has been something that's really helped me, is just like deeply understanding myself, and it gives me this piece of self-acceptance. So that will be starting September 1st. You can sign up for it below. All the other ways to contact me, reach out to me, connect with me are also in the show notes. I thank you so much for being here, and I will talk to you next week.